All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to change things up. Usually it's the Lord's Supper Fest. It's good. Thank you, William, for filling in and doing the songs. Um, I anyway. All right. Now I was thinking hard about what to bring for you this morning, and I guess um, there was actually an interview of Trump when he was flying to Israel to sign the recent ceasefire. And one of the questions, and he was just musing, and he was saying, I don't think I'm going to go to heaven, he said, because um, I'm probably not good enough, and uh, and like all I want to do. I'm just paraphrasing. You can watch the video. It's somewhere online somewhere, but all I want to do is to help, save people, help people as much as I can. And I thought that's an interesting statement, and I think it is something that many good-hearted people will always think, right? That you don't deserve, or that in life you're blessed, or not, and you don't always deserve, and that's the nature of God's grace, right? And so after that interview, I was thinking, um, it was an interesting thing for Trump to say, right? Because he always seems like this larger than life figure. But it brought me back to the idea of talking about humility and God's providence and how God uses us despite of who we are. And so we are all, built differently. We come from different places, have had different experiences. We have different talents, different roles in life. And all of us have different strengths and weaknesses. And one of the beauties of the Bible is that it contains so many different characters, and all of them show different facets of human experience. Okay, you've got like really rich and powerful people, the kings, you've got Solomon, and then you've got ordinary people. And today we're going to look at an ordinary person who was Peter. Okay, I think we're going to look at his life from his calling to his failures to his successes, and then we're going to look at briefly First Peter, which is what he wrote near the end of his life, and see what he actually thought of everything. Okay, because that's I think a great lesson. Sometimes when you look at someone, you don't actually know what they think of what they've gone through. But in this case, we're blessed that we see his life, and we also can see what he actually thought of his life and how his attitude and his character was reflected in what he believed that Christians should do. Okay, so Peter's life and example is an encouragement to us, I hope, because he was an ordinary person called to do extraordinary things. And that's what all Christians are called to do. And one of his great themes in his book and his great strength, I think, was his humility, because he always was prepared to learn from his trials and mistakes. So we start with this. This was the first encounter of Peter with Jesus. Okay, and this was when they were still following John the Baptist. So the next day, again, John, which is John the Baptist, was standing with two of his disciples, and John looked at Jesus as he walked by and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him say this and followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, "What are you seeking?" And they said to him, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" He said to them, "Come and you will see." So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. And one of the two who heard John speak and followed Jesus was Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother. So it wasn't Peter who followed Jesus first, it was the brother, okay, Andrew. And it's actually kind of interesting because in Jesus' closest group, Andrew wasn't one of them. Okay, it turned out to be Peter, James, and John, right? So, and we'll meet James and John as well together with Peter in the next passage. So then he found his brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which means Christ. He brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas, which means Peter. So this was Peter's first introduction to Jesus. And the next time we read of this Peter, it was when he was first called to be a disciple. So Jesus already knew Peter beforehand, okay? But this was the time when he started as a disciple. So in Matthew 4:18-20, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Peter and Andrew worked with James and John as fishermen. So the four of them were a little group. Okay, they were tradesmen, so they were like ordinary people. Okay, they were just tradespeople. He wasn't highly educated. He was not like Paul. He was not very like skilled in religious matters and things, but he had a desire to learn. That's why his brother was already following John the Baptist. Okay, so there were many incidences throughout, but then the next major event was Peter walking on water. Okay, and that's in Matthew 14:28-31. And this was the time when they were in the sea, and it was stormy, and then they saw this person walking to them, and they thought it was a ghost, and they were all freaking out, as you would. They were all panicking. And then Jesus said, don't be worried, it's just me. And then Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And I mean, that's a whole sermon by itself, right? I'm sure people have preached on this story where Peter had faith, but not enough to just get to Jesus, right? It was almost there, but not quite there. And as you would, right? Like if you were walking on water and it was stormy and windy, I mean, firstly, most of us wouldn't be walking on water, right? But if you could have done even a few steps, you would think this is amazing, this is great. But then you will always think, how is this possible? And you'll start to sink, right? So it just shows you that Peter actually had a lot of faith, just not all the way to the end. Okay, and then the next time we see of Peter is when he made that great confession. We all know this passage. All these passages should be familiar, I hope, to all of you, but it's just a summary of the big events in his life and the big occasions that he was described. So Simon Peter replied, okay, so this was when Jesus asked, because the disciples said, all these people say you're Elijah or you're like X and Y or all these prophets or whatever. And Jesus asked, but who do you think I am? Or who do you say I am? And then Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So this was a important moment because Peter had seen Jesus' miracles, had saw his power, but at the same time, he was not right because he believed that Jesus had come back to restart the Jewish kingdom, right? That Jesus is going to be a king on this earth and he's going to take over everything and restore the Israel to its proper place of prominence. I mean, that's the normal Jewish idea of the Messiah. And he was pretty convinced of this view because just a few verses down, Jesus began to tell the disciples he was going to go to Jerusalem, suffer many things, be killed, and on the third day be raised. And then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus and said, far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And then Jesus said to Peter, get behind me, Satan, you are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, on things of man. So Peter's life was full of ups and downs, right? He must have felt really good when Jesus praised him and said, you are doing a great job. you're gonna be the next in line. You're gonna lose on earth what's loose in heaven. Then next he says, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, that's harsh sayings, isn't it? Like if you were told that nowadays, I tell you, if you tell your workers this, they will just lose it. Like you tell them off, they'll all quit, or they'll write complaint letter to HR and say it's bullying. Really, that's absolutely what happens nowadays. But God did that to Peter. And then right in the next chapter, Jesus took him. So Jesus praised him, told him off, and then still took him up the mountain to the Mount Transfiguration. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his whole clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we're here. If you wish, I'll make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." And he was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." So again, you can preach many lessons on this, but it shows you that Peter was one of Jesus' trusted, closest group. Okay, Peter, James, and John were his inner circle, so to speak. And it's normal. Everybody will, all groups will have an inner circle. So it shows you that Peter truly believed in Jesus. Okay, so he was always learning. He was a simple man, and he had many misconceptions, but Jesus always taught him the right way to go. And then near the end of Jesus' earthly life, he told Peter this. He told Peter that, I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same thing. Okay, though they were, Peter overestimated his own strengths and his abilities. Okay, this is a harsh one. This is a tough one, because just a few verses down, so that was in verse 35, right? And it wasn't. It was actually the same night. So it's not like it was a very long time away, because right after this, the Last Supper, he would be arrested. He would go to the garden to pray. Then he'll be arrested, and then just before the denial, you will remember, if you turn to Matthew 26 and look at it, it's a long passage. The servant girl asked him, "Are you related to Jesus?" Peter said no. Someone else said, "I saw this guy with Jesus. He must be related." Then he said no. And then finally he began to curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. That's actually an amazing story for so many reasons. Life is full of uncertainty. You could be on the moon, have every success and happiness one day, and then it all comes crashing down, right? Like, you could be winning until you're losing, and we will always have to deal with that uncertainty. And it is so hard to make decisions under stress or pressure. That's one of the hardest things. Like at work, like every day, I make hundreds of decisions, right? And in my work, obviously, when you make decisions, I mean, I guess it's kind of like in the army or in the military, when you decide to bomb someone or kill someone, you're making a lot of decisions. Um, uh, or you're sending people to their death. It's just a terrible decision you have to make. In my work, I guess I make decision on whether to to say this is bad or this is fine or whatever. And I mean, fortunately, more times than not, it is always good than bad. But you have to make the decision quickly because people are waiting. And under this stress, Peter obviously made a tough decision, right? He had to deny Christ to save his own life. And perhaps this was God's plan for him as well. God knew that this would change his life, isn't it? So this was a opportunity to change his life. And Christians, we are not perfect, or are we free from inconsistency? Like, we lose our temper, same as everybody else. We make mistakes like everybody else. And sometimes you say one thing, you do another. Okay, that's just what it is. But the most important thing is that you try to get better over time. Okay, you strive to be better. And we don't be content. I mean, we're taught to learn contentment, but the one thing we should never be content with is to not improve ourselves as Christians, okay, as people, as followers of God. You always have to try and get better. So that's why when I learned singing, I always wanted to get better at it. When preaching, you always want to get better, knowing the Bible, you want to know more. Don't be content in your mediocrity. Okay, so don't stop. Don't stop keeping on. And it's amazing that even after that denial, which most of us don't like to be betrayed. Like betrayal is a big thing, right? You don't want to be betrayed. And Peter betrayed Jesus, but Jesus could see that he could come back from that. And in John 21, 15, and 17, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. And he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my sheep. Tend my sheep. And he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And I mean, it's a important passage because this is the last interaction directly between Jesus and Peter, and it restored Peter back, and it clarified his mind, I think, for what he had to do after. So Peter had to learn through bitter failure. Winning at life is not winning throughout life. Like you can't actually win all the time. Okay, like you have to fail. Things have to go against you, and you have to lose. And all of us will lose at various points in our life. But to win in the end, to be victorious, ultimately, is to endure failure and loss, but to keep your faith, keep your hope, and keep your love intact. To not give up, even if you fail to live up to your own promise or to your promise or your potential or your promises. Okay, and that is a important lesson. And Peter learned that you don't know how you respond to things until you actually have to do something. Like he said he wouldn't deny Christ, but he did, right? He did. And we know at the end of his life, we watched the video when we watched the drive-through history, they'll talk a bit about Peter and his death ultimately in Rome. But the tradition says that he was crucified and he died in the end. So Peter had mistakes. He thought the wrong things. He was corrected. He kept learning. And I think humility was one of his key attributes. Okay, and that's one of the key attributes of Christianity as a whole. And when we read First Peter, one of his writings, he identifies this idea. And First Peter actually talks a lot about submission, humility, and suffering. Okay, so it's a good book. I think we covered it with Herman a few months ago. And in that book, Peter summarizes all those experiences we read about in the gospel. It talks about holiness, identity, about submission and humility, and whether it's if you're in power or in authority in marriage or as a Christian, as an elder, as a member of one another, we always need that balance of humility and submission. So we come back to that passage which both William and Elijah read. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourself, all of you, with humility towards one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Now, submission is misunderstood today, and it's one of it's a very important lesson we learn. We all have different roles, and hierarchies are made by God, and it allows for orderly running of things. Okay, people naturally will form a hierarchy. Like you like no, it is normal that whoever has the best plan becomes the leader, and other people will follow. Right? That's a normal way things work, and all of us actually understand that, and we therefore must remind ourselves to always be subject to God, who has the best plan, because He's the leader, and then we follow that. Humility is about when Peter said, "Clothe with humility," it talks about his willingness to serve, and we cannot serve God if we are proud. Okay, because to serve God means you have to acknowledge He's better than you. And Peter grew from learning his mistakes and his failures. And if he was not humble, he wouldn't have learned from it. He would just think, God, you're giving me a hard time. I've had it. I'm done. I'm out. I quit, like Judas. Go kill myself. In some ways, that's the problem with many in the world today. They think they're not prepared to take the bad with the good, and they just want the good. If you give them a bit of bad, they just break. They don't learn and grow, and that's a real problem. Okay, so pride maybe leads to the hard heart and stubbornness we see today. And then if you follow this example, life is actually very amazing. Okay, because God always had a plan and a way for Peter and for all of us. Matthew 6:34, don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. What will provide what we need? Seek ye first the kingdom of God. That's from Matthew 6. And then Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. I know, we all have things we need, like students want to pass exams, people need visas to stay in Australia, people need jobs, marriages or whatever, children. There are endless trials and challenges we face. But we are blessed because we can share that burden with God. He never takes it away completely. I mean, if Christians say, "Oh, you just cast your care to God and then it's all great," that's nonsense, right? Like you can trust in God, but you still feel it. Okay, that's the reality. You still feel it. Like no one can get away from that, from the concern. Okay, but don't let it get out of control. And I hope that is what Christians have. You don't let it get out of control and take over your life. I mean, God tells us no temptation has overtaken you, but that is common to man. And God is faithful, and He will not let you be tempted beyond ability. With the temptation, will provide a way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. And that's the promise God has made for all of us. So in conclusion, I hope this has been encouraging, right? The life and experiences we see Peter go through teaches the value of humility and God's providence. Peter was a tradesman, a humble man, and God used an ordinary person with all his imperfections. He denied Christ. He had wrong ideas about Jesus' mission. He even after that, in Ephesians, Paul told him off because he was still not treating the Jews the same with the Gentiles. He wouldn't eat with the Gentiles when the Jews came to visit, and so he was not perfect. But we learn from him because just as he was not perfect, God could still use him to accomplish his mission, and God has the power to perfect us just as He perfected Peter for his service. And I hope we take that message to heart and continue to trust and be humble and let God lift us up. Thank you.